Are you ever worried about yourself being in danger of the hitchhiker effect or in any other way?
The first part of the question, I believe it followed her to the school. And the reason for it is she explained that during her entire life, it had been there. So she would move from one house to another house. Everything would be quiet for a couple of weeks, 2 weeks maybe, and then everything would start up at the house again. And it was your typical like haunting stuff. So she'd be alone in the first floor and she'd hear footsteps upstairs. She'd hear doors slamming. She has a dog and it would bark at the nothing in the corner. And so what I believe, personally, what I believe happened is it followed her to the school. It was at the school for probably about 2 or 3 weeks because when I did research, I ended up finding out that 911 call was actually the third 911 call that we got at the school that we couldn't explain. But it was the only one where the audio was clear enough to actually hear the voice and understand what it said. So officers actually made entry into the building. And so what I think happened is it didn't like the fact that we were going around asking so many questions, and then it followed her back to the house because when I went and talked to her the first time, she didn't tell me anything happened. I walked in and I kind of, hey, we had this weird thing happen, and the only reason I went in there is because the officers had gone into the nurse's office, so I was just going to ask her if she'd ever experienced anything weird in the nurse's office. And her normal personality was very outgoing, very friendly school nurse type personality until I brought up that topic, and then everything shut down. And it was the third time I approached her that finally she said, "Fine, I'll tell you." And I asked her, "Well, why did you not tell me like a couple days ago?" And that was when she told me that 3 weeks ago, everything at the house had stopped, and for 3 weeks she had no activity, no noises, no doors slamming, no nothing. But the night prior, everything started happening at the house again.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic threw their plans against us.
Prior to your abduction, did you believe in UFOs or any sort of alien life form?
All things unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
Hey, Unexplained Ones, this is Dr. Mounts with All Things Unexplained. If you'd like to support the show, there's a few ways you can do it. One of the best ways is to check out our YouTube store. Just head over to youtube.com/@allthingsunexplained. You'll find hats, hoodies, coffee mugs, slides, and more. Another way to support the show is wherever you're listening. Make sure to follow or subscribe. Make sure to comment, hit the like buttons, share with everybody. And if you have a chance, leave us a rating and a review. These things really help the show defeat the algorithms that try to keep us away from disclosure. Finally, you can head over to BigfootUFO.com for lots more. And remember, the truth is still out there. All right, everybody, welcome back to All Things Unexplained. I'm Dr. Mounts, and we're back again, and Smitty Neves is joining me tonight. Smitty, how's it going tonight? You're muted, Smitty, so we did not hear what you're saying.
I'm good. I apologize.
Okay.
I just love her introduction. It's awesome.
It is a pretty cool introduction, and of course, the narrator, Larry, is the father of CJ Derringer, who is not with us tonight, but we're going to carry on and do the best we can. It will not be easy, but we'll see what we can do. CJ and I, by the way, had a very busy week, Smitty. Some of you may know. We went on the Fox 8 morning show this week and did a Halloween segment that was on Halloween morning. And you can find that on our website at BigfootUFO.com. And just a little promo for myself real quick. I have got an Amazon #2 new release out, the world's first Bigfoot pickleball book. Also the world's first children's pickleball book. And Amazon #2 new release. You can find that on BigfootUFO.com. Also, I just released Bigfoot Halloween Party. Halloween's over, but for us, Halloween's year round anyway. It's a counting book and it's pretty popular. So check that out. But tonight, we are ecstatic to welcome, and let me put their logo up on the screen, Marianne, Robb, and Dave Rich from the UAP-PD, located in Arizona. They are retired Arizona law enforcement officers with 59 years of combined experience.
Wow.
They present nuances of investigating UAPs as law enforcement professionals, including the hurdles that have kept UAP investigations from occurring. And I think most of our listeners know, but I feel like I should clarify exactly what UAP means. It's the new term for UFO. It stands for unidentified anomalous phenomenon. There are approximately 800,000 law enforcement officers in the United States. They work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. They are seeing things, but they are not talking about what they're seeing. Marianne and Dave are here to tell us why and share with us some of the best UFO cases. Their mission with UAP-PD is to provide insight into unexplained phenomenon seen by law enforcement officers, many of whom have not spoken about their encounters due to the stigma put on them. Let's please welcome tonight from UAP-PD, Marianne, Robb, and Dave Rich.
Yay.
Guys, welcome to the show.
Glad you're with us.
All right. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for having us.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, could each of you, Dave and Marianne, give us a little insight into your law enforcement backgrounds?
Well, I was a police officer in Arizona for 34 years. And during my time as an officer, I've worked patrol, I've worked arson. I was an arson detective, property crimes detective, also a narcotics detective. And of course, all my years as a police officer, I have spent, oh my gosh, all my years, maybe tens of thousands of interviews that I have done. About 7 years ago, I started with the organization MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network here in Phoenix. And what was neat about that is me being a police officer has helped me with doing MUFON field investigative work. And also, as a MUFON member, it has actually helped me in my police work. There was times that I've had a couple of different stories or different cases where knowing the people in the UFO community that had helped me get into these folks that just thought that nobody would understand what I'm going through or what's happening. And I'm like, yeah, I do, because of MUFON. We kind of got into this UAP-PD to help other officers. Now, myself personally, I haven't seen anything while I was working on duty. And I haven't, but I want to help officers that have seen something. Now I'm going to let Dave Rich talk, because this is actually the reason we did start UAP-PD.
All right. So, similar background in the respect that I was a police officer for a little over 25 years. Started in patrol like everybody else. I was in detectives where I worked narcotics, gangs, homicide, sex crimes, and ultimately ended up ending my career with the School Resource Officers Unit, which is unusual, but I have had an experience while I was working. It's an interesting experience, but more importantly, not only did I have this experience, I also felt the stigmas that Marianne and I talk about, which, like you mentioned, the hurdles that come up with when officers decide, do they want to come forward and speak about what they saw or do they not? In my case, it wasn't a UFO sighting, it was actually a paranormal sighting. With UAP-PD, we don't just stick to UFOs. In fact, we probably have more paranormal stories than we actually have UFO stories. But we believe in cryptids, paranormals, UFOs, because ultimately what our goal is when I had my experience, I basically got called upstairs and when you say called upstairs, it's usually not a good thing. I got called upstairs and basically was accused of lying about all of it, even though I had video, audio, evidence of what I had encountered and what I was researching and looking into. But I had a sergeant flat out accuse me of lying and making it up, which, as a police officer, when it boils down to it, everything that we do is based off of two things. And it's what evidence can we gather at a scene, and basically what is our credibility? Is do people believe what we're saying is true? Because that's really the core of everything that a police officer does, is gather the evidence and then present it in a way that is believable and honest and trustworthy, because that's the way you want to represent yourself. So to have a sergeant look at me and accuse me of making up something when I had video evidence of it, audio evidence of it, was the first time in my life I actually worried about my career. And so at that moment, I was like, you're done. You don't talk about this. So I sat on this for 6 years?
6 years.
6 years. I sat on it, did not talk about it to anyone, didn't want anybody to know. There was a small group of people in the department that knew about it, but I never said anything because I was too close to retirement. I didn't want to, the ramifications of losing your job because somebody questions your credibility as a police officer is, like, they use the term career suicide. And that's what it is. Because if you get fired from an agency for something like that, you're never going to get hired by another agency. You're done. So basically, as UAP-PD, we came to the conclusion that we have officers who are seeing things and are in the same boat that I was in, where you had to keep it quiet. And that stuff kind of eats at you. It sits in your heart and in the pit of your stomach. And you've seen stuff that you want to so desperately tell people, this is what I saw, this is what I experienced. I did the investigation. I looked into it. I ran down every possible lead and was left with, what is this? But you can't come forward and say anything because of your career. So what we've decided is that we're going to present a group that will meet with these officers, gather their stories in a safe environment, and be willing to take that bullet for them the way that we were willing to take the bullet in the real life when we were on the job. We'll take the stories from them, we will leave their names out of it, and we can present those stories in forums like this, in stage presentations, and different types of things, in books, format, whatever we're going to do, but do it in an environment where these officers are getting the opportunity to get that off their chest. They're getting an opportunity to present it in a safe environment, and then they know that they're still shielded, they're still protected, because ultimately that's the why of what we're here for. Our ultimate goal is we want to help officers, we want to help first responders deal with a trauma, because every situation, everybody who has ever seen anything, whether you're in law enforcement, whether you're a firefighter, or whether you have nothing to do with being a first responder whatsoever, and you're just driving down the street and you see those lights in the sky, or you see that thing walking down the road, there is a level of trauma there. And it basically goes into the fact that in our brains, we're expected to know what things are. When you get confronted with truly the unknown, it causes that anxiety, that stress inside of you where you don't know what it is, and it weighs on you. And we wanted to tell people to leave that.
Right. It's probably very similar to fight or flight reaction. And guys, before we go any further, I need to interrupt just a minute. I think some sort of electronic device kicked on. And it's causing some, it's reminding me of a refrigerator or something.
And we got it is Arizona, so it's still hot. So it's the AC unit that's outside here. Marianne's going to take care of it right now. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worry. Okay. Our good friend of the show, Dane Beck, his dad is visiting down from Montana. And when he left Montana to fly down here, it was -4.
Oh.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's
I wish it was.
I don't even think our thermometers go that low here in Arizona.
No. And a matter of fact, CJ, our co-host who could not join us tonight, she used to live in Arizona, and she would talk about, forgetting and leaving things in your car, and they would just explode, for example, or incinerate.
Oh yeah, you get a lot of melted stuff in your car.
Oh, absolutely. And you were talking about the trauma and it of seeing something unexplained. And I know that police train for the fight or flight response, right, to a deadly situation. How does that contrast? That encountering something unexplained that you haven't trained for, as opposed with something that you have trained for, but that would, really frighten the normal population.
Well, part of our presentation is we go into this thing called cognitive dissonance, which is basically in a nutshell, it's you train to handle all these situations. So we go through police academies, we go through trainings after the academy, post academy, we go through annual training all the time on how to handle all of these situations. So you go into this situation thinking, hey, I can handle this situation. And then you encounter that thing that you can't quite understand. And I can tell you exactly like what happened with my case. When I started the investigation, which I think you guys saw our presentation, right? You've seen parts of it?
Only just a little.
Just a little? Okay.
So please share.
Oh, it's a long one, but it's a
Yeah.
So basically, at one of the high schools that I was working at, we got a 911 call at 11:54 in the morning, so just before noon. 911 operator answers the phone, says, 911, what's your emergency? She hears a voice that sounds like a girl, that's like a whispered voice, and it sounds like it says, I'm scared. And so the dispatcher says, what was that? And it repeats, I'm scared. She says, you're scared? And then it says, no. And then you hear clear as day the sound of the receiver being dropped onto the countertop. So obviously patrol gets responds to the scene. They search the entire building and they find nothing. They find the receiver on the countertop. The officer picks it up and talks to the 911 operator. So we know for a fact it was this phone. And he talks to them. They hang up. He clears the entire building with the other officer. They don't find anyone. They go into the nurse's office and he says, I couldn't tell you what it is, but something that we could not see rushed past us out the door. We literally felt it rush past us, but we couldn't see it. And we were standing right next to each other. So I get involved in the investigation because it's my school. So I have a copy of the 911 tape. I also have a copy of the security footage in that office while that happened. You see that phone is in the center of the screen, just up and to the right. It's not detailed enough to see the phone itself, but you can clearly see that at the time that 911 call comes in, there is nobody at that phone. There is nobody in that building.
Wow.
And you see the officers come in. You see the officer pick up the phone, talk on it. You see the two of them go into the nurse's office, and a couple seconds later, you see the two of them run out looking like they're looking for something, and nothing came out. So
Now, is this a school that's currently open with children attending?
Yes. So I did a whole investigation. Now, the point that I was trying to get here is I told this story to my nephew years later. And he looks at me and goes, hey, Uncle Dave, weren't you scared? Because at the end, we couldn't explain it. And the only thing we could come up with, and I didn't finish it off, we ended up finding out that there was a nurse at the school who has been followed by a ghost her entire life. And we were able to equate it that it was that ghost that followed her to the school because everything at her house stopped until I started poking around, and then it all started at her house again. But when I was talking to my nephew about it, he was like, well, weren't you scared? And I was like, well, no. He's like, well, how could you not be scared? And because like every officer, we're trained to investigate these things. So up until I got to the very end, I was 100% convinced that I was going to find some logical, rational explanation for it. It was going to be like, oh, the phone call came in from one of the classrooms, or it was a crossover of a line, or somebody tapped into the line, or it was some sort of hoax. And every time I came up to it has to be this, I would then find hard, fast evidence that I could not disprove that clearly showed it was not that. And it wasn't until I got to the very, very end when I was talking to the nurse and ended up finding the story about her being followed by this spirit that I was left with scratching my head going, holy cow, I think this is, I don't have an explanation. Because I never wanted to say, hey, I think it's a ghost. I was always like, I can't explain it. And then especially after that, when I got called upstairs and accused of lying, even though I had video, audio, all of the stuff, story from the nurse, the whole 9 yards, that was when I just shut it down, because at that point I was like, I can't lose my career over this. But now
Right.
that I've retired, I'm like, hey, no, we have an obligation to help these officers, these firefighters, any first responder who has seen anything. We really ask for them to contact us because we want to get their stories. We want to let them know that they have a safe place where they can recount these tales of what they're seeing, and we'll help them navigate through it. And if it's something that we can investigate, we're definitely going to go investigate it.
Do
Oh
they
man.
seem to be responsive? I mean, have you had a lot of people respond to your call for these type stories?
We've had it's been
Mm.
very streaky. We have had a lot of people, and then we have these kind of lulls where nobody comes forward. But when we get these people that come forward, it's really hard to describe. Like, we had a detective that came in and told a story, and when he sat down, and this is a guy that I work with. He was with our agency. I worked with him for years. I had never seen him so uptight and like tense until he started talking about this topic. And then when he got done talking about it, you could see his shoulders relax. You could see that all of that anxiety that he was feeling inside had gotten out. And when I saw that, that was when I realized we're doing the right thing. And obviously, I can't talk about his story. I told him I wouldn't talk about his story. But the fact is that there are officers like that, and we're getting them, and they come in and they tell us these stories, and you will literally see a physical change in their demeanor because they get there and they do, in the back of their mind, they're like, I think I trust these guys, but. And one of the big things that usually ends up selling them on coming forward and talking is the fact that I look at them flat out and I say, I was you. I felt that. I know what you're going through. I know how it can be, like, literally worried about your family and your wife and your kids, and or your husband, if you're, whatever. You're the threat to your livelihood, to your future, is real. And when I explain that to them, they usually tend to kind of be like, okay. And so, like, we just talked to a guy a couple days ago, and it was the same thing. Like, he's like, I'm up until I got here, I was still thinking, I don't know if I really want to ring that doorbell. I don't know if I really want to show up. And then when we got him in there, and he sat down and started to feel more comfortable, he was able to retell a bunch of stuff. And it was stuff that he admitted to us he had never told anybody.
Yeah,
before.
his family or anyone he's never told. Another thing is, we are police officers, and we are a brother and sisterhood. Even retired or not retired, we're all together in the, as we call it, like the thin blue line. Somebody tells us a story, we're not going to ridicule them. We're not going to laugh at them. We're not, I mean, you get you TV shows out there that, oh yeah, that police officer, haha. That's not something that we do. And that's one thing is, police officers, first responders can trust us because we are the law enforcement officers. And like he says, Dave's been through it. So he knows how these people feel coming to us. And again,
Right.
we tell folks they could remain totally
Yeah,
anonymous,
we will not talk. If you do not want us to
Yes.
name, we will not talk.
or you can identify yourself. So we do have one
And,
officer
yeah,
that
we've had hit and miss. We've
Yeah.
had one guy that absolutely wanted us not to say anything about who he was. He was like, I'll give you my story. I'll even take you out to where the place is. I just don't want my name involved. And we're like, absolutely.
Yep.
And then we've had the other end of the spectrum. We're like, dude, you can put my face out there. You can put my name out there. I don't care. I just want it out. And
Yeah.
so it's interesting to see the difference, because it's
Well, I think that in our research, I think that's a common theme, really. You have a lot of people who don't disclose anything due to the fright of being labeled,
Mhm.
for lack of a better word, crazy.
Yep.
And people will just not say anything. That's been a common theme throughout our research and throughout this podcast. A lot of people stand in the background and don't reveal anything that they've actually seen paranormal wise.
Oh yeah, professional, well educated.
Yeah.
What you would call normal middle class folks living in a neighborhood and raising kids, and nobody knows something that they've seen in the past, but maybe they'll come on the show and tell us. So I want to give a shout out to listener Blake Best. We're talking to Marianne, Robb, and Dave Rich with the UAP-PD. And Blake Best says he has so much respect for you guys. A real life Mulder and Scully. The truth is out there. Marianne and Dave. And of course, CJ and I actually went as Mulder and Scully on the Fox 8 morning show this past Halloween morning.
Nice.
That was a great comment, Blake. And I would
Yeah.
love to revisit real quick this elementary school or the school
That
I
was
just
actually
went.
high school. It's a
The high school. Yeah, that makes it a little better for me. I think if it was elementary school, it would be even creepier. I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. But, when we talked to the folks from Skinwalker Ranch, we had the folks on from the secret Skinwalker Ranch and beyond the Skinwalker Ranch. They introduced this phenomenon to us that frightens CJ to this day. This phenomenon of the hitchhiker effect. And it sounds to me like that's kind of what you're referring to with this
Absolutely.
nurse, right? And I have to know, one, Dave, do you think that this hitchhiker effect kind of took hold on the school or just kind of was left behind, maybe waiting on the nurse, or what happened? And then two, this is for both of you. When you're dealing with anomalous phenomenon, whether it be UAPs or anything else, are you ever worried about yourself being in danger or of the hitchhiker effect or in any other way?
The first part of the question, I believe it followed her to the school. And the reason for it is she explained that during her entire life, it had been there. So she would move from one house to another house. Everything would be quiet for a couple of weeks, 2 weeks maybe, and then everything would start up at the house again. And it was your typical like haunting stuff. So she'd be alone in the first floor and she'd hear footsteps upstairs. She'd hear doors slamming. She has a dog and it would bark at the nothing in the corner. And so what I believe, personally, what I believe happened is it followed her to the school. It was at the school for probably about 2 or 3 weeks because when I did research, I ended up finding out that that 911 call was actually the third 911 call that we got at the school that we couldn't explain. But it was the only one where the audio was clear enough to actually hear the voice and understand what it said. So officers actually made entry into the building. And so what I think happened is it didn't like the fact that we were going around asking so many questions, and then it followed her back to the house because when I went and talked to her the first time, she didn't tell me anything happened. And it was one of those things where I had known her for years. I walked in and I kind of, hey, we had this weird thing happen. And the only reason I went in there is because the officers had gone into the nurse's office. And so I was just going to ask her if she'd ever experienced anything weird in the nurse's office. And her normal personality was very outgoing, very friendly school nurse type personality until I brought up that topic. And then everything shut down. She didn't want to say anything. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm a trained investigator. I can tell something is up. So I ended up leaving and then came back later that day. Same thing, very friendly, outgoing personality until I brought up that topic and then it shut down. And so then I was like, okay, well, we need to kind of give this a couple of days and then we'll reapproach it again because now I know something's up. And it was the third time I approached her that finally she said, fine, I'll tell you. And she proceeded to explain it all to me. And I asked her, well, why did you not tell me like a couple days ago versus now where you're willing to tell me? And that was when she told me that 3 weeks ago, everything at the house had stopped. And for 3 weeks, she had no activity, no noises, no doors slamming, no nothing. But the night prior, everything started happening at the house again. So I believe it followed her back to the house because it didn't like the fact that somebody was asking too many questions. And so I believe that the hitchhiker theory, I think it really is. I think it's real. As far as us being concerned, I can't speak for Marianne, but and this may not be a popular opinion, but I have a faith. I am Christian. I believe in Jesus. I believe in God. I believe that He put me here for this to help explain it because without going too much religion, because you never want to talk religion, but in the Bible, if you believe the Bible, it mentions demons, it mentions ghosts, it mentions creatures that we can't explain. It also says that God created the heavens and the earth. It does not say that He made life on this planet and nowhere else. So when it comes to the hitchhiker mentality, I have yet to really fear that anything's going to attach because I truly feel that I am taking steps to protect myself, protect my family, and I truly feel that what we're doing is for good. And I think that if we do what is right and we do it for the right reasons, I think there's a level of protection that we have because we are of this world. Those things are kind of just visiting this world, which inherently I think makes us a little bit more grounded, a little bit more safe. Now that's just my own personal take. She might have a different story.
I don't. I'm also a Christian, and after doing some of these investigations or some of these stories that people share with us, I don't feel that there was any type of hitchhiker effect whatsoever. Um, I just got a very strong belief in the Lord, and um, I haven't had any um, encounters or any feelings of any bad paranormal or any bad anything evilness coming into my house. So, I, not bragging or anything, but I feel protected.
Yeah, I think we do a good job of doing the right things and taking the precautions because you'll go to a scene and we've both gone to places and you walk in and you're like, yeah, something's not right.
Yeah.
And I'm not a psychic or anything like that, and I'm sure somebody who is might be able to actually explain what it is that we're actually feeling. All we're feeling is kind of like the whole this doesn't feel right. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know it doesn't feel right. But then when
Right.
we leave, I never feel it like following us. It's like when we leave, we feel that we've left whatever it is
Yeah.
that's creating that feeling.
That makes sense. And I tell you what, I respect the fact that you guys take precautions. You know, I think it makes a lot of sense. And worst case, hey, better safe than sorry, right? And we may or may not circle back to that tonight, but I would say I would love to revisit the topic of religion and UAPs in the future sometime. Matter of fact, we're planning a roundtable discussion on exactly that, the potential correlation between UAPs and angels and demons and the biblical aspects of UAPs. So we definitely think that you cannot necessarily separate those things, right?
No,
Like,
they're all related in one way or another. That's our philosophy is we call it the big three phenomena. So if you think of those, what do they call those? A Venn diagram, where you have the three
yep,
circles. There's the paranormal, there's the cryptozoological, and then there's the UFO, ufology, and they all overlap. And one of the things that we bring up in that is like David Politis. I'm sure you guys know who David Politis is, right?
absolutely, yes.
Yeah. He makes reference in his latest book and movie to the link between Bigfoot and UFOs and the missing people in UFOs. And then you have television shows like Terror in the Woods that make direct correlations between the supernatural, the paranormal phenomenon, and cryptids. And so the biggest one, the hardest one that we had to kind of link was how do you get the spirit world and the UFO world linked together? And it was funny. I had a buddy of mine look at me and go, "Hey, did you see the video of the orbs that was on?" He told me about this video of orbs that was on the internet. And I was like, "Oh, orbs! Like you mean like orbs in a haunted house, or orbs like flying in the sky?" And then I stopped and said, "Boy, you're an idiot. There's your link. You have orbs that are
Right.
both orbs that are related to hauntings, but then there are also orbs that are flying in the sky that are related to UFOs." And so, exactly what you're saying, we firmly believe that all three categories are related and linked in one way or another. Don't know exactly how that link is, but we're convinced that they are related.
Oh, I fully believe it too. And I've written articles on this, and I would throw some other things into your Venn diagram too, because I believe that there's an intersection of science and religion in there as well. Like we cannot separate these things. You know, Albert Einstein was looking for a theory of everything, and he started to discover things that really disturbed him. You know, he called them literally spooky things. He described spooky action at a distance, and he literally thought this is a very disturbing, spooky phenomenon. And Eric Bard from Skinwalker Ranch talked to us about how, hey, they've got all these anomalous phenomenon, and what he's looking for is some sort of commonalities, a common thread that can tie them all together. So it's exactly what you're talking about. So, and I feel real bad for you, Dave, on your experience with how they treated you about your encounter. I think the same thing's been happening with the military. And it's so sad because you would think that police officers and military encounters would kind of be a gold standard of paranormal or anomalous encounters. And it's so sad that it's not. What do you think about that? I mean, shouldn't we be giving more respect to encounters by law enforcement and military personnel?
What's interesting about you say that is, okay, the government came out, disclosure, hey, we're not going to fire you, we're not going to discipline you if you come forward and tell us a story that you saw something in the sky while you were, up in the air or whatever. It's not the government we're worried about. It is our other police officers, the people that you work with. What they do is you tell a story like Dave. Okay, what did he have on his locker? He had a tinfoil hat. He was laughed at. He was a bumper sticker. I honk for grays. That's the problem. It's the people that you work with are the ones that ridicule. And I'm not a pilot, so I can't say, but I could almost guarantee that the pilots out there, if they came forward and said, yes, they saw a light in the sky, that wingman that he has is like, I'm not going to fly with him. What is he going to do? See a light in the sky and take off after the light instead of focusing on whatever mission they're on? They're not. So I think that stigma is going to be with police, with military, at least with the foreseeing future, that it's going to continue.
One of the things, like you're saying, is you're entirely correct with your assessment of, you would think this should be the gold standard for witnesses, and that's part of what we talk about, and part of what we in UAP-PD are trying to do is, you think about it, part of our thing is like, what is a police officer? So they're a highly trained observer who is taught to control their emotions, taught to walk into a situation, assess all of the possible outcomes, and remain impartial. That's like a fantastic witness for anything, whether it's a paranormal sighting or somebody just stole your car. That is the greatest witness you could ever get. And that's why, as UAP-PD, like, we love talking to the law enforcement and first responders, because your witness has such a high level of credibility that anything they say, it has already been looked through. Because if a police officer was driving through a field late at night and he sees a light in the sky and he's like, oh, what is that? And he looks at it and he ends up finding out that it's a crop duster, which we still have here in Arizona. He's not going to bother coming forward and tell us. Why? Because he already looked at it and said, well, what am I going to do? Go and tell him, hey, I saw these lights in the sky, and guess what? I found out it was an airplane. No. These first responders and military, fire, police, they're already trained on how to look at stuff and how to figure out what is normal and what is abnormal. And so that makes the best witness. And you're right. And going off of what Marianne said, and kind of like what you touched on earlier, with the government, we're not really too concerned about. It's society on a whole. And I think, quite honestly, there's a tipping point that I think we need to reach. Because we've encountered officers that are on the reservation, and they have come forward and told us stories. And when we talk to them about the stigma that I faced and the stigma that other officers faced, they can't believe it. They're like, what do you mean that people are making fun of you? What are you talking about? And as near as we can figure out is, if you look at some of the different cultures, like the Native American culture here in Arizona, spirits, star people, cryptids, they are as normal as like an average everyday encounter with when you're not on the res. So when you see somebody and an officer says, hey, I saw Bigfoot walking down the side of the road, and you have a group of people that live on the res, they're going to be like, well, yeah, that's no big deal. Yeah. But the moment you step off of the reservation, you step out into like one of the municipalities here, you say something, now they all look at you and they go, well, that's ridiculous. You're crazy. You didn't see that. You saw something different. And it's because their culture, their society it is such a big part of their society that it's accepted. So, like, two of our friends that we're really good friends with are John Dover and Stan Milford. I don't know if you, John Dover's been on Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, stuff like that. They were just
Yeah.
here with Antonio a few minutes ago. They just left. They're all down for the MUFON.
Oh, that's right.
But John and Stan, like, we've talked a lot about that, and they've explained on how it is such an integral part of their culture and of their story of how they became, that the idea of walking into a room and saying, "Hey, I saw a ghost," they're all just like, "Well, yeah, okay." It's like saying I saw a bottle of water, or the dog just walked into the room, or something like that. But when we get away from that, the society off of the reservations and away from that, where it's not part of their culture, they still struggle with the idea of, if I say he says he saw something, and I say, "Oh yeah, that's fine," now I'm going to get laughed at too. So now not just him, but I'm getting laughed at as well, and nobody wants to get laughed at. And so my personal belief, and I think Marianne's as well, is if we can get society to the point where they accept that it's more than likely that this is real, is when we're truly going to see differences, and we're going to be able to see military, law enforcement, firefighters, the average person on the street. When they say they see something, people are going to not laugh anymore. They're going to look at it and go, "Well, let's talk about this and look at what was that." Because the reality is every one of these sightings, they could be something. And it might be a case of misidentification. It might be something that is easily explained if we look into it. But if nobody ever comes forward and says it, we're never gonna know. Because like I said, I mean, some of our investigations, we ended up finding out that it was nothing more than either a hoax or some sort of misidentification. And that's kind of what we're about. We're not here blindly saying that all of this stuff is real, but we do believe that everything that gets reported should be looked into and see, is it something that is
Right.
more than normal, or is it something that could be something that we can't quite explain?
That's also at the heart of what gives you guys validity, right? That the fact that you will put in the research, and if there's nothing to it, hey, there's nothing to it. Let the data bear out the facts, right? And there's no need to speculate. We can collect data and we can make conclusions that way, the scientific method. And I think that gives you guys a lot of validity there. So we're talking to Marianne, Robb, and Dave Rich from the UAP-PD. We're so thankful to have you guys here with us tonight. And by the way, you can support our show at BigfootUFO.com. Marianne and Dave, how can folks find out more about your organization, the UAP-PD?
Well, we do have a website. It's UAP-PD.com. You can go on there and see what we're all about, what our mission is, and also a little bit of information about us ourselves. But also, if anyone would like to contact us, it's called UAPpolice@gmail.com. Contact us, and I'll give you a call back right away. And we would love to hear stories. And we will literally go anywhere in this country. Now that we're retired, we can travel a little bit more. But okay, well, I'm really retired. He's still kind of sort of working. um, but we would go anywhere to contact these folks if they just want to be a Zoom meeting and we just talk on the computer. We could do that. We can talk on the phone. Or if anyone would really like to come and tell their story in person, we would have no problem doing that. UAP-PD.com. We do have a little link on there. It says contact us. So they can do it that way. And within the day, we will contact the person back right away. But that's our two biggest ways for people to contact us.
I think
Well,
that's great.
let me ask Dave a question. During your experience with all of this doubt, did you ever start thinking to yourself, well, maybe I didn't see exactly what I thought I said, just because of the amount of pressure that was put on you by all the other law
Yes.
enforcement officers?
Yeah, I did. Because there came a point, and it's interesting you asked that, Smitty, because nobody has ever asked me that. But there was a point where I was like, "Am I crazy? Was this nuts?" But the thing that I had going for me was I had the audio recording and I had the video recording. So every time I started to think, maybe I'm mishearing it, I would play the audio and listen to it again and try and listen to it and go, am I really hearing that? And you can't deny it.
Yeah.
It's that clear. I actually had some friends from MUFON that actually analyze it and they actually were able to amplify it. And when you hear the amplified version, it is as clear as day. And it
Wow.
is intelligent because it responds. Because one of the things that I forgot to tell you guys is when the call came in, the 911 operator says, 911, what's your emergency? The voice says, I'm scared. She says, you're scared? And it says, no. Well, when we amplified the audio and I finally got to hear it amplified, we found out that it doesn't actually say, I'm scared. It actually says, I scare.
Whoa.
And so then when it says, you're scared, it says, no, and then drops the phone. So
There's a
that
big difference.
is
Mhm.
intelligent response that you can hear clear as day. And so, in answer to your question, yeah, there was a time when I was like, did I really hear that? And then when I got the amplified version from Jim Mann, a friend of ours that we work with that was here at MUFON, there was no denying it anymore. And then I go back and look at the video and I'm like, I know they went in there and what are they running out looking for? And I'm looking at the video of where that phone is and there were 3 sets of motion detecting lights and none of them go off when this 911 call comes in. And as soon as the police officers walk in, all of them start popping on. It's like there's no way in the world anybody was at that phone when that 911 call came in.
Wow.
Yeah.
I tell you what, William Shatner never took a case like this on Rescue 911. I don't know if y'all remember that show. It's like that. But what a great story. I tell you what, that is truly disturbing. And you guys, if you're up for it, speaking of traveling, I would love to present some historical law enforcement UFO encounters from
Sure.
your files. And I've got a couple of surprises in there for you as well.
To be continued. All things unexplained.
What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you
Okay.
want it about
Yes,
the
Absolutely.
Alaska.
we do.
Okay.
Dr. Taylor was revealed to be the chief scientist of the UAP task force with the Pentagon.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
Hey, Unexplained Ones, this is Dr. Mounts with All Things Unexplained. If you'd like to support the show, there's a few ways you can do it. One of the best ways is to check out our YouTube store. Just head over to youtube.com/@allthingsunexplained. You'll find hats, hoodies, coffee mugs, slides, and more. Another way to support the show is wherever you're listening. Make sure to follow or subscribe. Make sure to comment, hit the like buttons, share with everybody. And if you have a chance, leave us a rating and a review. These things really help the show defeat the algorithms that try to keep us away from disclosure. Finally, you can head over to bigfootufo.com for lots more. And remember, the truth is still out there.